Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Ironside webinar. We're going to be talking today about IT-driven versus user-driven analytics and how you can unify those two approaches into a single bimodal infrastructure. Today, we have myself, Keen Han. I'm the content marketing specialist for Ironside. I'm going to be moderating and watching for your questions during this presentation. And then our two subject matter experts who we have with us today are Rob Minogue, who's our Director of Advisory Services, and Scott Masage, who's our Practice Lead for Business Analytics. So without further ado, I will hand it over to them and let them get started. All right.
Great. Thanks, Keen. Rob Minogue, I'll start things off here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So as far as the term bimodal analytics, definitely a much used phrase these days, so we're going to try to give a bit more clarity on that and how we see it, especially on the ground with customers and so on, and it is something that, is very intriguing. Gartner in particular, made some, especially with the Magic Quadrant this past year, made some pretty provocative changes to the Magic Quadrant. We'll talk about that a bit, with that. I think from a Gartner perspective at least, what they're trying to say as far as their line in the sand is that user-driven capability for data discovery and visualizations on modeled and unmodeled data, that's basically, they're saying is now a necessity with BI tools. And that's the nature of at least mode 2 on bimodal. So that's how we think of it. We definitely agree with I think Gartner's thinking there, and we want to dive into that to hopefully paint a little bit of a clearer picture with some practical examples of what we've been seeing. Conversely, that was the mode 2 approach and what Gartner's come up with for a definition there. There's also mode 1, and mode 1 is that IT-driven approach, with typically modeled data, a semantic layer, a BI desktop tool set and all that, where IT is serving up the data for consumption by the business. Still in our eyes, and I think universally, still a very important mode of operation. So as Keen alluded to, what's the best strategy to bring these two things together? And that's what we're getting at there as far as old ways versus new. The old ways would be, definitely more of that enterprise approach versus new ways, or, it's just putting a lot more of the functionality and tools directly in the hands of the users. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more in depth about that those two modes. All right, so mode 1 and mode 2. So as Rob has said, mode 1 is more IT driven. It is, centered on performance management. It's typically requirements-based, tops down, focused on integration and reuse, with the goal of better decisions and, sort of the scope across the enterprise. Okay. Mode 1 is the approach that should be familiar to those of you who are, users and developers with the legacy enterprise BI suites. Mode 2, again, is more of a user-driven analytics pathway. It is more focused on data discovery. It is oriented to specific opportunities. It involves a fair amount of bottoms-up experimentation with data. It is mostly done in the moment for immediate use. Its hallmarks are business innovation, and in terms of its scope, it tends to be functional in nature. In a lot of ways, mode 2 has been around for a long time. So if we think of how business analysts have used Excel through the years.
Yeah, very much a mode 2. I think Scott and I are both fighting cold, so excuse us for some coughing here. But So, a lot of cases, Excel has always been that kind of what I call the last 50 feet of analytics, right? So, you do whatever you have to do as a business user. You have that fire drill you have to address. You have to get that analytics story put together and delivered for decision support purposes. You do it, you do whatever you can to put that together. Before the last, before 2005, Excel would have been the tool of choice for that type of an approach. But now with the advent of Tableau, Qlik, and other technologies, and the enterprise BI vendors have also made a lot of progress in this area. Now users have, a lot more robust, a much more robust set of tools to choose from for that last 50 feet of analytics.
Right, and certainly, the success and market penetration of vendors like Tableau and Qlik have forced the traditional enterprise vendors to shift their models a bit to expand scope and cover those capabilities. And many of them have made significant progress in those efforts.
So, I think, and we'll dive into this a bit, right? So the trick here is, if you look at what's on the slide here, right? Very appealing, right, on the left and the right, but there's a lot more complexity and things that need to be figured out to figure out how these things can coexist, these two approaches, and how they can live together happily, I guess, for lack of a better term. So.
Okay, so when we think about approaches to quantitative business decision making, we agree with Gartner in that there's kind of 4 modes for this, right? And we might in some ways think of this as sort of a maturity curve of sorts. So let's start at the top. Let's consider this in the whole. So, we and our business users are faced with a set of data on which we need to make decisions and take action. And how we get there kind of differs along these kind of steps in the maturity curve. So the first is descriptive, and that's really focused on, well, what happened, right? So this tends to focus on historical data. In terms of the technologies here, this is where we're seeing standard BI reports, SQL queries, that sort of thing. There's a lot of human input generally involved in getting to that decision point and then taking action. So move down one to diagnostic, right? This gets into, well, why did something happen? And this is more the realm of variance analysis, focused on KPIs, scorecarding, multidimensional analysis, right? They're really the realm of OLAP, which helps us kind of understand that historical data in context, okay? And begin to tease out, well, what drove that historical data.
Or, yeah, to better understand the why, right? And that's ultimately, as far as from an analytic perspective, that is the value add, right? You have all this data and you're really trying to explain the business problem that's happened.
And certainly with the diagnostic approach, we've kind of moved ourselves up a bit, right? We've made ourselves more prepared to make decisions and take action, right? There's less human input. We're able to do that inside the tool. The next level up, if you will, is predictive, right? And that is getting into, well, what will happen? And if you think of this, there's actually 2 flavors here, right? So the first is forecasting, and then the next is actually it rises to the level of predictive modeling, right? Where we're able to use data sets and advanced analytics tools to begin to understand, what the future might hold.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a continuum here that we've seen in that predictive space, and as Scott touched on, you have from a finance perspective typically, just typical forecasting approaches that are employed during the budget, varying levels of sophistication there. Maybe you're doing some sort of Monte Carlo type simulations or things like that to help with sensitivity analysis on a forecast. But then it gets into, what we would consider more true data science, and there's dedicated tool sets to approach that to get at, what would be, more robust predictive modeling approaches there. So a little bit of a continuum there as well.
Okay, and then finally there is prescriptive, right? So this is rising to the level of decision support and decision automation. So the human element is taken completely out, right? What we're doing here is we're taking predictive models, learning from those, and injecting the output of those into a business process. So this might be something like next best action or fraud detection, where if your credit card company identifies certain values and certain transactions that they think, based on their modeling, represents fraud, they will just shut down your credit card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, best action to add to that, prescriptive usually does come out of a predictive modeling exercise. So that predictive modeling exercise, those usually start with a single, data scientist or set of analysts coming up with a model that they feel does a good job of predicting certain behaviors. And then you operationalize that, right? So as Scott touched on, that's where prescriptive comes into play. Someone at Chase or Visa or something like that did come up with a pretty good fraud detection model, but then how do we implement that, to actually put it online in the system? And that's when you really get to decision automation. To take that a step back, I guess a bit, right? So another thing we've seen and we would definitely recommend, this doesn't necessarily, these 4 different levels of business decision-making capabilities don't necessarily have to be a linear path at all either. So, a lot of times when we go into customers, and that is true, that you need to be able to walk before you can run. That's definitely true to some extent with these types of projects. But and you're going to hear us talk about use cases a lot. It really does depend on the use case. So we've had a lot of success, for example, in the predictive modeling space, even with customers that don't necessarily even have an EDW or have a pretty rudimentary data infrastructure. So you really shouldn't think of, jumping into some more advanced analytics type topics as a barrier or something that's beyond your means, especially with the advent of the more advanced tool sets and so on. And what's happened with a lot of these tools, even the BI tools, I would say, Scott, if you would agree, they have matured as well, and they are now incorporating a lot of these advanced analytics capabilities as well. So,
absolutely, Rob.
Out of the box, so in a lot of cases. So definitely, no question, something to explore. Okay.
All right. So now let's think about that traditional BI mode 1 and how we typically approach problem solving in that way. So often it starts with requirements, right? So a user comes to you and says, well, I need a report that lists open accounts in Southeast Ohio. So there's not a lot of context to it. It's just a very basic request, right? What are the requirements? So you react by creating a tabular report that lists all open accounts in Southeast Ohio, and then, boom, you've delivered exactly what you request or what has been requested. Okay.
Drop the mic and you're done, right?
Yeah, so off we go. So obviously this is a simplistic example, and there's a lot of assumptions in this process, and there's really no analytic context, right? There's really no concept of why, okay, why they're asking for this. And typically your end users don't know what to ask for or how to ask for it, so oftentimes they just say, you know what, give me everything and I'll figure it out, right? They need to go off with that data and figure it out probably in Excel, right?
So yeah, the other way to think about this, this would be the alternate approach, and trying to illustrate the benefit of a use case oriented approach. So on the left, we have that technical requirement, which I'm sure a lot of people on the phone have gone through more of a waterfall approach to development, and you will see things like this in a requirements document, a technical requirements document, defining a query string and how basically users are going to interrogate the data. So in this example, this is a athletics entertainment example. You can think of it as maybe it's a boxing promoter example, just to keep things simple. 2 different ways to think about how to approach what the user is asking for. You can look at it from straight query perspective, but and this is what we try to do when we're on the ground, at the beginning of these engagements, is really try to come up with use cases like you see on the right. So pretty specific business questions being asked here, right? And gives everyone involved a lot more context on what the actual ask is and what the business need is. So in this case, it's the marketing team. They're looking for, ahead of a really big event, basically looking for activity out there, right? So athlete names, ahead of the event, to maybe more target the marketing in that big lead up to the event, to make that, make sure that the messaging is on point and that, users are getting, whatever they can as far as, supporting marketing to drive attendance to the event and all of that. So, very, very different, right? And more often than not, or I shouldn't say that, but, in a lot of cases, we will see, this is the actual request on the right, and what you end up with is what you see on the left. And I think from an approach perspective, this use case oriented approach, if you really look at this, and we'll talk about this, you need to iterate on this, right? So there's a lot of different things at play here. There's different tool sets that are probably going to be the best ones to use to eventually meet the need. But IT and the business need to work together on something like the use case on the right to get a better understanding of how to go about this, how to source the data, how to work with the data. Is this better served by a visualization or more just kind of an open-ended data discovery? You are working with the marketing team, which maybe isn't necessarily as in tune with certain types of tool sets. How should it be served up for them as an audience? So a lot of questions, and what I think Scott and I spend a lot of time on the ground with customers, trying to figure out ultimately, the capabilities that are needed to address, a business use case like you see on the right.
So if we take a look at this, right, this really represents that kind of mode one process flow where we have various types of data off on the left, and through the use of something like ETL, we're able to stand up that data in kind of formats that make sense. And then through a semantic layer, we author reports and expose those reports through an enterprise BI suite of tools. Okay, and that's how the business users are consuming the BI. Okay. Now, talking a little bit more about that kind of that data. Typically, we see those being we see the data arranged in enterprise data warehouses with star schemas, facts, and dimensions. They tend to be highly organized and scalable, and they're optimized for analysis. Okay. And finally, the data in those enterprise data warehouses is well integrated, right? There's been data governance applied with common definitions, and it's all very well integrated and understandable. Okay, but there is a dark side to taking that enterprise reporting and an enterprise data warehouse approach, right? It takes a lot of work to build, and it takes a lot of time to build, and it takes a lot of both to maintain, and it tends not to be that flexible. Okay, so what has really happened over time is that we have seen, again, the rise of mode 2.
Yeah, and I think, typically, and this is probably familiar, right? So if you do have this enterprise approach, and it is the legacy approach, still very important from an overall capability perspective for certain types of report and analytics delivery. But what happens is, and because of a lot of the reasons Scott discussed, it falls short of what the users are looking for. And then if you think of, I guess, Tableau's strategy in particular of basically what we would call a land and expand, it's a free download. They can try it out, and, pretty quickly, pretty easily in a lot of cases, and you can see this kind of on the bottom right here, it's pretty easy for them to bring in ad hoc data sources to meet that decision support need and come up with some pretty compelling visuals. And, again, back to that last 50 feet of analytics, maybe even in some cases, eliminating the need for PowerPoint slides, and which can typically be a pretty onerous process, right, to actually deliver the messaging. So a lot of very compelling functionality that business users now have in their hands, and but with that, it usually does start as a point solution. So it'll usually start very localized. As an IT group, then we would hear like 2 or 3 different departments are playing with Tableau or starting to like it. It's saving them some time. They're able to deliver value quicker from an analytics perspective. So very localized, and then there's, there is that governance question, right? So, business users, even with the best type of data discovery and visualization tool set, there still is, can be a lot of work involved to get that data prepped to where it needs to be, that ad hoc data on the bottom right here, get that data to where it needs to be be able to be used in the analytics. So that's, we'll transition a bit, but that's where, IT can start to assist it from our perspective, and, definitely with that use case backdrop as well. Okay. So,
yeah. So, let's think about this from a business user perspective, right? So this mode 2 is really about data discovery, and it is a new day, it is a new dawn, right? Because the challenges, there have been so many challenges with mode 1, right? So the data that you need may not be available. The functionality you need may not be available as enterprise BI tools. The IT queue is too long, right? It takes too long to turn data into information and extract value from it, okay? So with data discovery, usability and flexibility increase. Those functionality gaps are remedied with compelling visualizations and the ability to perform data mashups. And again, as a business user, I don't need to wait for data to be made available in the enterprise governed data sources, right? It's available now. All I have to do is get it into a flat file or Excel and load it up into my desktop tool, and boom, I've got it, right? I can show my boss this great visualization, okay? But, the truth is that data discovery also has a dark side. So transforming data is challenging, okay? So, think about it, we're back to spreadsheets and flat files where we're, doing lots of joining, mashing together of this data. Reusing the data is hard. Again, lots of spreadsheets. The challenge is, okay, well, what do I do next month, right? It took me a number of hours to wrangle this data together and then build a visualization on top of it. But you're sort of the victim of your success, right? So you've impressed folks with your data visualization to help make decisions, yet now it's expected that you need to do that next month, next quarter, okay? These solutions tend not to be enterprise friendly either. So they lack authentication, they lack the capability to distribute them, schedule them, what have you. And ultimately, it's not a scalable approach.
And I think on that same point of being a victim of your own success, what usually does happen when you put that new, report or, compelling visualization in front of, they want a lot more of it, right? And that can, not only burden up the business users, but then they start going to IT and saying, we need this perhaps across multiple divisions and all of that. And then being able to actually, manage those expectations and set a strategy for broader, basically, the ability to stand up broader enterprise capabilities, can definitely be a challenge and something that, we also spend a lot of time on the ground with customers on how to manage that success that these users are having operating in mode 2 and deploying it effectively across the enterprise. And we'll now jump into some of that as well.
Okay, so, unfortunately, one size does not fit all. We've shown you that the enterprise BI reporting approach has a dark side, but so does the data discovery approach of mode 2. Okay, so what we have seen in the marketplace is that, if you will, each side is trying to subsume the other. The traditional enterprise reporting tools are adding features that allow for that localized experience, right? Data discovery and visualization. But then you also have the data discovery vendors adding server-based options to try to sort of move from that mode 2 on the right side. They want to move left and to pick up some of those capabilities that we find in mode 2 vendors. Okay, so ultimately neither did that great because the architectures are too different. Okay, and choosing either one leaves gaps in capabilities for your organization.
you can think of this as a strategy, that you can maybe ponder if you are in the situation where, you've started off with the EDW and that type of approach, that more IT-centric BI approach. Now, some of these data discovery tools have made some inroads, are gaining some traction. What can IT do next to help support, that mode to operating approach. So one way to get started on that, is that basically that data layer, and that's what we're trying to show here. So, as an IT organization, reaching out to the business, really trying to start with, a little bit of a better understanding on some key use cases. So, usually with a lot of these data discovery tools, it's pretty easy to look at usage metrics from behind the scenes. That's a great way to see, what components or what views or what dashboards, people are really interested in, and then word of mouth as well. This guy is a great power user. You got to see the stuff he's building in these tools. So kind of follow the rumor mill, if you will, a bit on that to figure out what's actually going on there, right? So what business value are they adding from an analytics perspective? And then, usually more often than not, there's going to be some pain as far as data prep and all of that.
Yeah, so I mean, really what this approach does is it takes, if you will, shadow IT out of the shadow. Right? So this is IT standing up a place where the business can essentially experiment and prove value. Okay, and does that data set, can it be used to solve this problem or that business problem? Okay, and it's a reasonable approach, and it can be done in the open, and it really opens up the lines of communication between the business and IT, where those two groups are meeting on a regular basis to understand progress, understand if there's any, does the business have any additional needs in this realm, and so again, this is an approach where that can all happen in the open, and give IT a sense. Right, as they work along with the business teams around, what is this data about, and how might we profile it and consider it as part of the enterprise solution.
And this is where, to step back a moment, talk about governance for a second. So this is what to governance, where you can start to think about pushing that. So we definitely advocate a use case approach here, right? So you want to pick one or a couple things to start with for this, what you could call, data enablement, the IT data enablement. You do want to set up an environment, whether you want to call it politically or governance-wise within the organization. Maybe it's a skunk works. There's a lot of different terms you can use for it, but where IT and the business can work together on these use cases, kind of cordoned off from the rest of the enterprise a bit, and really just look at what data really will add value to what we're trying to solve here. We had that example previously, with marketers looking at athletic events and usage and all that. Maybe that will require some unstructured Hadoop type data sources. Maybe it will require some social media type data to really, answer the question the way we want to. Really just roll up, the key here really is to roll up your sleeves, try to put, a lot of the other challenges, data and technology-wise to the side for a moment, and just start, figuring out from a data perspective what really will make this specific use case or this specific analysis more effective. And now, this is, what you could call, it would definitely be aspirational. We do see customers, evolving into this operating mode. So this is, again, an approach to this coexistence concept, right, of mode 1 and mode 2, and how the business and IT can effectively work together. And, again, can't emphasize this enough. recognizing the fact that mode 1 is still very important. Your structured reporting serves a purpose. I think from our perspective, ERP data sources like the general ledger and all of that, they're not really that conducive to data discovery in a lot of cases. You're still going to need structured financials and OLAP type approaches there. So really want that to be very apparent here, that it isn't, and I think with a lot of the you call it hoopla around mode 2 in particular and data discovery tools, by no means does this mean that you scrap your IT infrastructure. Quite the contrary. This is what we're showing here. It becomes a mechanism to actually evolve that hardened operational structure. So from left to right here, so we have the business users on the left, and there is this evolution that you've seen on the discussion to date. They've started to play with Tableau, now IT or Tableau or Click or any of these other types of exploratory tools. Even MicroStrategy, IBM, a lot of the other enterprise BI vendors have built out a lot of very compelling data discovery and mode 2 type capabilities as well. So especially with more recent versions over the past year or so. So it's really getting your IT in the business, getting the users comfortable with those tool sets, starting some enablement, use case by use case on the left. And now that the business users have started, operating, in that discovery mode, but also still leveraging, the BI, the more enterprise data sources as well. So that's more on the left, and then it becomes that usage conversation. We really like that approach. If you can look at use case or usage of these data discovery tools and say, hey, Bob created this really great view, this visualization of, maybe it's a geographic visualization of market share by territory for the sales force or something like that. A lot more people are really interested in what he's doing, but we're reluctant to share it more broadly because he really only built it for one group. But the need is there, and how do we basically expand the great work he's done as a power user? So that's kind of point 0 to us as far as this, what we'll call this feedback loop. It's getting use cases like that identified, and now in the center section, okay, so Bob did this great view. Maybe it's only for the Northeast for certain divisions. Now it's the business and IT, really working together on why that. What analytics really need to be performed, maybe now more broadly across the enterprise, leveraging what's been built there locally as a starting point. Again, bringing whatever data to bear, so you can see that in the middle, feeding into these data discovery tools, and take a pilot approach there, right? So you've gone from a user, maybe one or a few business users on the left. Now you've evolved to the middle where you do want to build a more compelling pilot that you can now show to this broader user community. That skunkworks, if you will, is business and IT working together to come up with that pilot. And then once it evolves from there, and a great way to get out of the kind of waterfall approach and get into a more iterative approach to analytics delivery as well, right? Instead of spending months and months in Word documents and requirements documents, what we try to advocate is taking more of this pilot approach. And then, with the business and IT, you have that compelling pilot. Everybody understands the business value. A lot of the technology underpinnings and data needs are very clear as well, because it all is feeding into this pilot. Then it becomes that, on the right, and that's where, IT operationally, does its best work, right, as far as hardening, what we call hardening and operationalizing this for more enterprise usage. And that's where this can become the queue, right, for the enterprise data warehouse. Instead of the long queues that users are used to, instead IT on the right is ingesting these pilots as far as new requirements that they need to get into the enterprise infrastructure. So that goes into the enterprise infrastructure. And then you have the governance conversation. Once a lot of that is clear, How are we going to make this repeatable as far as data management conversations? Again, you're only pushing a single use case pilot through this at a time, and governance, we are not, we are definitely not proponents of a monolithic approach to governance and trying to enforce governance across the enterprise with a single set of data management rules and all of that. You really do need to be flexible on it for it to be effective, and you should take a use case approach to governance as well. And now this is all teed up, back on the left, right? So now it becomes part of the enterprise data and toolset approach. So.
Right. So just to summarize, you're taking an approach where you allow for that experimentation and innovation to happen within the business. It's done with the full support of IT, and once value is demonstrated and proven, you are then making it part of the enterprise BI ecosystem and injecting it into the normal business processes for overall, betterment of the organization.
Okay.
So, in summary, reporting has evolved over time, right? Everything used to be kind of the enterprise approach, mode 1, but the reality is that there are two big focus areas that exist, and they're both important, right? It's important to have both the standard trusted set of BI reports that are the hallmark of enterprise BI, mode 1, but it's also important to be able to innovate, right? And the idea here is that, we don't want there to be a wall or conflict between the business and IT. We want them to work together. And we think that, some of the models that we've shown here allow for that to happen, and, to the betterment of the entire organization, okay? The reality is that most organizations need to have both mode 1 and mode 2, whether or not they realize it, okay? And, using them both means that there is a greater need for data governance.
And it's, and I think to add to that, right, it's definitely not all motherhood and apple pie either, right? There will definitely be challenges you'll encounter, trying to take this use case pilot strategy. You do have to be very selective, especially initially, on how you approach this and really pick the right use cases. To us, the ideal use cases are ones that you definitely want to solve more of a localized analytic need, but by solving that localized need, as a result, you can basically showcase that and have that ability to say, if we solve this localized use case, proving out that look at these new capabilities that we have across the enterprise. So what we've seen is sometimes when you take the use case approach and you really are focusing on a single division, in a lot of cases, the enterprise users or the users across the enterprise feel left out, right? So you have to proactively manage expectations there. And your first couple of use cases that go live in this pilot strategy, very important that they're successful. I think a lot of us, this business for many years, right? When you come out of the gate, with a new tool set or a new approach or anything, or things like that, and some defects are noticed, and it's that can, as far as the adoption and the effectiveness of the new strategy, that can definitely negatively impact things. So I definitely want to make sure that this isn't a panacea, and we help a lot of our customers proactively anticipate a lot of these things that can also occur by implementing this type of a strategy. Okay, so that's I guess the lion's share of the discussion. A lot of resources out there, and a lot of these discussions, a lot of different places you can go to get more information. Scott and I are also available, and I'm sure you also have Google as well, right? So hopefully a lot of these things we've raised hopefully made it a bit more real to you as far as what bimodal is, and maybe some ideas on how to implement some of these strategies. From an offering perspective, as far as what Ironside can do to help. We think about advisory engagements, basically 4 different flavors, if you will. On the left, you have more of the IT-driven bimodal workshop approach. So that's where, IT as an organization really does want to assist the users. And I would say, I think it's fair to say that the way we went through this, these slides today, it would be more in line with this IT-driven approach. But that's really where, it's in a more general sense, you want to enable that Mode 2 type capability, and what do you need to do as an organization to get there, more in a general sense, capability-wise. So we typically meet with the business users, a certain amount of session hours with the business users to tease out use cases, and use those use cases as a backdrop to basically do an empirical analysis of capability needs. And then that can be, leveraged in multiple ways as far as, what capabilities you should start with that'll resonate across the business the most. So a high level on how we approach those. The business-driven workshops, that's more where there is a specific strategic initiative, or usually something along those lines, a specific business problem or challenge that needs to be addressed. So that's where, and the business wants to work. Maybe the business has the funding to run with this initiative, and the business is really looking for assistance on how to approach that and how to engage IT with that. So that's where you can see the difference here of IT engaging us versus the business engaging us. So a little bit of a different approach there. Usually the use cases are a bit clearer. And then usually, a lot of cases, these can take on an advanced analytics spin from predictive modeling or customer churn, and those types of initiatives are things we would, just examples of things concentrated on those workshops. Next one is functional design. So this comes into play with budgeting and planning and forecasting, and incentive compensation management, where you're really trying to replace a process, right? So a little bit different than IT. You're trying to employ business-driven. You're trying to figure out how to meet the strategic initiative. This, you're really trying to replace a process. So with that, of activity and task-oriented approach, we'll start with there, a process mapping approach, but still getting to the same endpoint, which is, what are the analytic capability needs gaps, and what's the best strategy to fill those gaps. And then lastly, on the right, the bimodal workshops can also be dovetailed into a system selection. So you can see where, using this use case-oriented approach and having workshops with the business users, the gaps can become pretty apparent, and perhaps you don't have don't feel you have the correct tool set in-house to address those gaps, and that's where we can leverage that to help recommend perhaps some different technologies to help solve the problem. So lastly, so what we've been talking about today as far as overall Ironside's capabilities, it's in this top layer, right? So this approach, this more business analytics capability-oriented approach is really kind of our cornerstone. But then once it gets beyond these roadmap engagements, we do have delivery teams across the spectrum of business analytics. And thinking back to the earlier slide as far as descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive type approaches, our advanced analytics, business intelligence teams, definitely have expertise in most of the enterprise tool sets across those. And then as far as data integration and performance management skills there as well. So definitely delivery expertise once the roadmap and assessment engagements are over. So I think that's it. So questions?
So if anyone has a question for our panelists, you can type it into the chat box, and I will read them out loud for everyone to hear. Following this presentation, you're going to receive a survey via email to help us kind of continually improve the content that we deliver to you in these different webinars. And we'll also be sending you a recording of this presentation within the next few days or so, so be on the lookout for that. So the chat line is now open. Feel free to enter in any questions that you have. Okay, so we've got one question here, which is, how do I get my bimodal environment going without spending a ton on tools and technology? Which, I mean, seems to be that's a question we get a lot, so it's a good one.
Yeah, so and we kind of covered off on this a little bit in the session itself. And when we said that a lot of the enterprise BI vendors are, trying to make that move to Mode 2. So, and are building that technology, that capability into the tools as they exist today at no additional cost. So certainly whatever tool set you're using, I would, have a chat with your support team or your sales rep and understand what Mode 2 capabilities are there. Because really all the big vendors that we're aware of have baked in those capabilities, and again, many at no additional cost. So that's what I would explore as kind of a first step.
Great. We've got one more coming in here. Are there ways of communicating in bimodal environments that you find successful?
So I think the one, and we shared it with this audience, that conceptually that idea of that data workshop, right, where what that involves in terms of communication is really an outreach from IT to the business to say, hey, you know what, we want to help enable you. We understand that innovation needs to happen within the business, and truly, who knows the data better, right, than that business functional area. So again, this is IT performing some outreach to those business teams to say, hey, you know what, we're going to create a space for you, a sandbox of sorts, a workshop where you can experiment with data and innovate. We will support you. We will support you with tool sets that allow you to do that experimentation and that proving of value. And then from there, make it clear to those teams that, hey, if value is demonstrated, if value is found, there's a roadmap to get this content, these new discoveries, into the enterprise data sets.
Okay, so next question we've got here is, what is the fastest way to get governance into the data discovery tools? I'm looking for implementation strategies for the complex transformations, et cetera, for my business analysts.
So yeah, I think Scott and I, that's a really good question. I think from a governance perspective, it's where if you think in the data flow, you put it from a tool set perspective. So there, there's the MDM tool set, which can help enable the governance, and basically which manifests itself in that semantic layer. So if you think back to the feedback loop we were looking at, once you have gone through this data pilot stage and are looking at implementing that in the EDW, usually there is a lot of more robust tool sets in the enterprise space to address that, but I'll let Scott.
Yeah, so certainly again, as we've seen the more traditional enterprise vendors add Mode 2 capabilities, it's done so in a way that allows you to still maintain the level of governance. So, I won't name the tool, but certainly we have seen conceptually the mashup capability, right, where I'm able to an enterprise governed semantic layer and as a user mash up my size spreadsheet of regions or classifications of projects or what have you, And my ability to do that and share that is limited to what my administrative team allows me to do. I have a space where I can do that analysis, but I'm not sort of injecting, the ability for me as a business user to kind of blast that out to a greater audience is controlled by the administrators. I still get to do it, however, it's sort of a controlled thing. And again, I'm leveraging that trusted, governed enterprise semantic layer on top of a data source to do that.
And then, another strategy we've seen that can be very effective is the whole data certification process. So, there is always that question, it's that need for a check total, right? So the users have gone down this exploratory path. Perhaps it is with something like, in financial information that, does have to be right, has to be very high quality. What we've seen be very effective there, and this is, definitely on the right there when this is being, the use case pilot is being hardened, if you will. It's basically creating purpose-built views and reports and analytics that assist the certification process. So I think instead of just thinking about certification happening at that end user consumption layer, putting some of that same tool set to work a bit more upstream, so that the business and IT, and that's definitely a core part of the governance process. Business and IT are working together to certify that data before it ends up on the desktop. But even when it ends up on the desktop, depending on how open-ended the exploratory capabilities are going to be, and the nature of the data, it's one thing if it's social media data, maybe perhaps a certain amount of precision required. But if it is, mission-critical financial data, there's definitely some different approaches and rigor you want to implement.
All right. So the next question up is, do you feel that or find that business users are feeling intimidated by the power of some of these new tool sets?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, so our experience with some of the Mode 2 technologies, such as Click or Tableau, they are, they appear, sometimes they appear in organizations because business analysts go out and download them. So, they are acting alone, or functional areas are acting on their own to bring these tools into the organization. So, by virtue of that, I think they have a sense of how to make them work. Now, in terms of some tools being too intimidating, we do see that from time to time. However,
there's definitely a power user contingent, right?
There definitely is
with these tools.
Yeah, and that that may that intimidation, right, may be based on a number of things, right? It could be based on the complexity of the tool. And the answer to that might be sort of the graduated interface. I know many of the vendors have taken that approach where there are specific tools that are more focused at the reporting light, if you will, right? The business user, other tools within the suite, or the power user. But the other thing to consider there is actually, how intuitive is your metadata layer, right? So the intimidation factor might come from the fact that, well, I as a business user don't understand what I'm looking at. How do I find the data I need? And in that way, that is an intimidating experience. If you don't know how to create reports because you don't understand what the data points are, you're not going to use the tool.
Yeah, and I think Nirvana, right, from a usability perspective, is what you see with mobile apps and all of that, right? So that usability, we always keep that in mind, and in a lot of cases, user expectations are very high, right, because of that high level of user experience that is resident in a lot of mobile apps, and then they come into work and they're stuck with, I think to Scott's point, maybe they are trying to navigate a cube or that has 15 different dimensions and maybe not nomenclature that's familiar to them. So it's really, along with the use case, knowing the user and working with that user directly to figure out not only, I think, again, to Scott's point, what tool set makes sense, but what data set and consumption model makes sense as well.
All right. So there are a couple more questions, but I know we've already gone over our time a bit, so we'll let everyone go. Just want to let you know if you had a question and we didn't get to it, we'll definitely be reaching out to you directly to address those questions. So thanks very much for submitting them. Thank you to Scott and Rob and for all of you who attended. We appreciate seeing you here, and look out for the recording. It'll be along soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.